It was September 26th, 2014. I was, as I had hundreds of times over 9 years, in that house and in many houses, and for many couches for the 35 plus years that preceded this night, watching the Royals game. I'm not sure I knew it at the time, though deep down I was perhaps daring to dream it, but many things were about to change for me as a baseball fan. A pop foul behind home plate would settle into the glove of Salvador Perez for the final out of that game, clinching a postseason baseball game for the Royals for the first time in 29 years. I had heard the term overcome with emotion many times in my life. I'm not sure I ever knew what it was. On June 11th, 2003, I learned. My son was born, and the emotion that overtook my body at that moment was overwhelming and unexpected. A truly remarkable and powerful feeling. It happened again on July 17th, 2006, with the birth of my daughter. So I knew what it felt like to be overcome with emotion. Certainly those two instances make sense to be overcome by emotion. Watching a baseball player catch an exceptionally routine pop-up on television as a 44-year-old man seems like a less sensible time for this feeling. But there it was. I was overcome with emotion. Over 5 years later, as I write this on paper, well, electronic paper as we do today, and not just in my head, I am brought to tears remembering it. Even rereading it for some semblance of editing brings the tears of joy. I'll skip the part where the Royals still had a chance the next day to tie for the division and force a one-game tiebreaker, and only casually mention a rather important element to this story. The Oakland A's finished blowing a large lead for home field advantage in the AL wildcard game, meaning that this game that was so long overdue wasn't just happening, it was happening in Kansas City. No small part of the story, but on to the really good part. A few days of anticipation was a blur, but the build-up and hype were, to say the least, a bit intense in Kansas City. I recall a few specifics. After all, I would come to experience this over the next 13 months, but excitement and anxiety both reached their limits for me. I tried to convince myself that just having this game was enough. The results really didn't matter. The Royals had finally gotten back here, and I think I did a pretty good job. But then the game started. Backing up just a bit, because I'm a blogger at best, not a real writer. Back in 2003, the Kansas City Royals had a large, maybe 7.5 games lead on the division at the All-Star break. Yes, really. The team that had failed so miserably for so long spent 93 days in first place that year. And if the Kansas City Royals were going to make the playoffs, I was going to be there, and according to all the commercials and the Royals website, the only way to guarantee that was to buy season tickets for next year now. So I did, a 21-game package. That's a really long way of saying I had season tickets to the Royals in 2014, so I was always going to be at Kauffman Stadium for the wild card game. They were right back in 2003. They were just 11 years early. It was the perfect night, crisp and cool, just like postseason baseball was supposed to be. I was 15 years old when the Royals won their first World Series, and although I vividly remember watching with my mom and dad, sorry Kim, I assume you were there too, but I don't remember that part, and freaking out from the spot on the living room floor as Game 6 ended in dramatic fashion, and Game 7 a wonderful thrashing of the Cardinals to cap it off, I wasn't lucky enough to go to a postseason game in person back then, and how much does any 15-year-old truly care about anything? I have fond memories of 1985, but have more memories of the 70s and losing to the Yankees. 1985 felt more like it was overdue, more of a relief perhaps, than a seemingly impossible dream. That was different. This was different. This felt different. I was long past the spoiled childhood of a stunningly successful expansion baseball team that won a lot of games. I don't know if I just never thought about it as a kid or a young adult, or I just didn't care or just didn't understand. But as a middle-aged man, I knew this was special, even before I knew how special it was about to be. Getting here was hard, really hard, especially for the Royals. I truly appreciated that. I was truly grateful I was in that stadium that night. So the fact that it was crisp and cool, just like I imagined postseason baseball to be, for all those years, was not lost on me. The energy was indescribable, and I think in this case, not because I'm not a real writer, but because it's one of those things where the phrase, "you just had to be there," really truly applies. I'd been to a great number of sporting events in my life, a few Chiefs games, sporting Kansas City, including playoff wins, NHL games, Hundreds of Royals games, many very exciting regular season games, great comebacks, heartbreaking losses. Allen Fieldhouse is an amazing venue, and I've seen hundreds of games there. This was different. I had seen postseason baseball on TV many times, seen the towels waving, the living and dying on every pitch for 9 or sometimes more innings, heard the crowd behind the announcer's voice rising and falling moment by moment. Every single thing was big. Everything meant something, good or bad. The crowd knew it, and certainly the players knew it. We all felt it. It was awesome. Nothing matches it. I'm sorry, it simply doesn't. And a few years after writing this, I was at the Super Bowl, rooting for my team with an even longer playoff loss, watching them win the Super Bowl. But I stand by my statement. Nothing matched this night. If you've never been to a postseason baseball game of your team, the team you grew up rooting for, the team you waited for 29 years to get back to a postseason game, then you don't get it. Think back. Remember the best, most exciting game you were ever at for that team. Maybe it was late inning comeback, a walk-off win, maybe both on opening day. Remember that feeling? Remember that energy, that crowd? It's pretty awesome, isn't it? Now amp it up tenfold, 10 times the energy, 10 times the excitement for the entire game, not just that moment. And tenfold would just be the beginning. First pitch from James Shields, strike 1. Tenfold just amped to 15-fold, and I don't even know if that's a thing. But I'll stop trying to describe what I called indescribable. It was awesome. I'm pretty sure I said that already. But then a single. Well, crap. No problem, line out. Strikeout. Crowd goes wild. We're fine. We aren't fine. 2-run home run. Lots of baseball left, no problem. Didn't take long for the crowd to be right back in the game. Full throat, as many great announcers have said. Most notably, I believe, Mr. Al Michaels. The Royals also got a leadoff single in the first. Yada, yada, yada. The Royals get a very Royals run, and despite being down 1 run after 1 inning, things felt a lot better than down 2-0. Quick side note in a game that would be remembered, at least in part for the Royals' run game. 7 different Royals stole 7 bases that night. The first inning ended with a poorly executed double steal shenanigans that officially went into the books as a caught stealing at home by Eric Hosmer. 2 innings later, the excitement had not died down, and if it had dropped even the slightest, it came back quickly as the Royals scored 2 and led 3-2. Then the 6th inning arrived. A single by the A's, a walk, and Ned Yost emerged from the bullpen to pull his pitcher. It was most certainly a topic of discussion, but much less so if you know how this story ends, because after all, in sports, winning solves everything. What you need to know, at least in my version of retelling this night, this time was the indescribable energy and excitement that was pulsating throughout the crowd was gone. In one swing of the bat, then another swing 5 batter later, and another 2 more batters into the game. The impossible had happened. After 29 years of postseason silence, a stadium that for 5 innings was the heartbeat of a great baseball town, awakened from a 29-year-long coma, had again come to a stop. It was silent. Even the smattering of A's fans sprinkled throughout the K couldn't break the deafening sound of nothingness. All of us who had convinced ourselves, no doubt as a defense mechanism against the worst-case scenario of a 1-game series, that being here was the prize, that this night was our reward to be cherished with friends, family, loved ones, no matter the result, had over 5 innings allowed ourselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was more. That perhaps our reward was greater than just tonight. Maybe there would be more. Tried too quickly to once again believe that this game was okay. It got harder and harder as the Royals went quietly in the 6th, now down 4 runs against not just one of the best pitchers in baseball, but a pitcher that was just a bit better than that versus the Royals for many years. Leading up to the game, the media loved to tell stories with impressive stats to back them up about how John Lester had so often dominated the Royals. It felt like the 3 runs the Royals did manage was more than they should have expected, and right now, as a 2-out single in the 7th brought a flicker of hope, it was short-lived when a 2-pitch at-bat, 3rd out, meant just 6 outs left for the Royals, and fans everywhere still working on being satisfied to have just made it to this game. To quote Crash Davis, look it up in the unlikely event you don't get that reference, Alcides Escobar started the 8th inning by hitting a ground ball with eyes. Now, it seems only fair at this point in my little tale to mention I don't really remember 5 years later if that ground ball did in fact just squeeze between two fielders. But it was a ground ball, and I got to use a reference for one of my all-time favorite movies, so let's just go with it. With nothing to lose, down 4 in the eighth, Escobar took advantage of one of John Lester's few weaknesses. He simply didn't throw to first base. He did nothing to control the running game as a left-handed pitcher. It's likely he knew the odds favored him simply striking out the next three batters, so who cares if you steal? Well, the Royals did steal. Esky stole second. Not sure where we were back to the off-the-charts or tenfold level of excitement just yet, but we had certainly exceeded a glimmer of hope as, even though it took an out to get it, the Royals had inched a run closer. And then had stolen another base. The seventh pitch to Eric Hosmer was John Lester's last pitch. It was also ball 4 and put runners at first and second. The Royals' nemesis was out of the game. Was this the turning point? Or were they simply too far down? The crowd didn't care. We were back, baby. The energy was back. The energy hit an all-time high, for now, as a single by Billy Butler scored another run. The lead was now just 2. Another stolen base, and then a wild pitch. A wild pitch of all things. Again, skipping some very interesting side stories with backup catchers and catchers injured during the game, etc., because this is already too long and I'm still not a real writer. We scored another run, and with just 1 out, the tying run was only 90 feet away. Another walk, another stolen base, and the go-ahead run was at second base. Screw that just being here is the reward crap. We're going to win this game. 7 pitches and 2 strikeouts later, the inning was over. Was this it? Was this how it ends? It wasn't even October, at least not when the game started, and it wasn't just yet. It couldn't end now, not this way. Of course it could. In the 1970s and into the mid-80s, the Kansas City Royals were known as the most successful expansion franchise in any sport. For those not old enough to remember those days, it's certainly hard to believe. The previous 29 years, with very little winning and very little hope, made it easy to forget. Surely our comeback wasn't going to come up 1 run short. The Royals' bullpen did what they did. They kept the score the same. Although not easily, the top of the ninth ended with the bases full of A's, but end it did. Still just a 1-run game. So you're saying there's a chance. Ned Yost retired from baseball in 2019. Just a few weeks ago, as I write this. He was the winningest and losingest manager in Royals history. He had put a young, inexperienced, volatile, sometimes wild starting pitcher into the 6th inning of arguably the biggest game in team history, and it had blown up in his face just a few innings earlier. With a month to go in the 2014 season, I believe a poll of Royals fans would have likely gone 80-20 in favor of firing Ned Yost right then and there. I was probably in the 80. Mike Moustakas was certainly one of the biggest reasons the Royals were in the postseason. He was among the few who you could describe as the face of the franchise. A crowd favorite, no doubt. Not one of those, isn't he cute, he tries so hard and is such a nice guy crowd favorites. He was one of the best players on this team. He was an all-star. Not a typical Royals token every team gets a snowflake rule all-star. A true all-star third baseman that would a few years later break a long-standing, albeit pathetically low in today's game, single-season record for home runs as a Royals. He was Moose. He was the Royals. Josh Willingham had 11 years of Major League Baseball experience, 8 as a mostly everyday player. He had some nice years, peaked in 2011 and 2012 with 64 home runs and 208 RBIs, balanced very nicely over those 2 seasons. He had 40 and 122 total in the 3 years following. Jason Adam was a 5th-round draft pick in 2010 by the Kansas City Royals. He had a 4-something ERA in the minors. On August 11, 2014, the Royals traded Jason Adam for Josh Willingham. Most people didn't even notice. On September 30, 2014, Ned Yost removed Mike Moustakas from the AL wildcard game and inserted Josh Willingham to lead off the inning against A's closer John Doolittle. John is a left-handed pitcher. Mike is a left-handed hitter. Josh is a right-handed hitter. As the season wound down in August and September of 2014, Josh Willingham would have 86 plate appearances for the Royals with 17 hits and 24 strikeouts. Most people didn't even notice. On a 1-2 pitch, Josh Willingham hit a blooper into right field that found green grass. Everyone noticed. He was at the plate for probably 2 minutes and on first base for about 9 seconds when pinch runner Gerard Dyson entered the game. Everyone noticed that too. Escobar bunted to get Dyson to second. One out. Gerard Dyson stole third base in the bottom of the ninth inning of the biggest game in Royals history, arguably, but just barely. Then Nori Aoki hit a deep fly ball to right field that for a moment looked like it might just find its way over the wall in the very small corner of Kauffman Stadium that doesn't take a monster blast to be a home run, but never was an out so exciting. The crowd went wild, as they say. Dyson tagged up from that base that he had just stolen and scored easily to tie the game. From down 4 in the 8th, that statement would come to mean so much more in the next 13 months against John Lester to tie the game. Surely the rest was just a formality. We had all the momentum. We were at home. Remember how the A's blew a big lead for the number 1 wild card spot? The Royals crowd was back and louder than ever despite the late hour. It was just a matter of time before the Royals actually won this game, right? The A's would probably just go on home. This is our night. Some guy named Brandon Finnegan, who had just pitched in the College World Series 3.5 months ago, was in the game now. Clearly it didn't matter. The Royals were going to win this game. That guy named Brandon something needed just 8 pitches to mow down the A's in the 10th inning, including to end the 10th. Energy level ratcheted up again, if that was even possible. Hosmer leading off the 10th. Surely a walk-off home run was about to end this glorious night. Just a single, but okay, here we go. Lead-off man on. Sack bunt, winning run at second. Gordo and Salvi coming up. Get the champagne ready. Gordon grounds out, but Hosmer does move to third. Wild pitch, anyone? Perez grounds the second pitch he gets weakly to second. Inning over. Those that know how this story ends have certainly taken note of who made the last out of the 10th. Quite possibly the fastest ever Colt hero formation is continuing as Finna something gives up a 2-out hit, but a second strikeout in the 11th, and the crowd has regained any lost energy as midnight is either coming up soon or just passed. Who remembers at this point, but it was very late and few cared. Although I will again spoil the buildup of excitement and continue my attempt to make this telling of a story nearly anyone who would bother to read already knows the ending to, with my own 3 quick anecdotes. My wife and I were lucky enough that night to be sitting in the Diamond Club at a table in the first row that seats 4. The other 2 seats were occupied by a couple, although there that night with his son, as I recall, who along with another couple had purchased several of my season tickets from me over the years. In the 7th inning, they commented, and I do remember this clearly, quote, "We may miss the greatest comeback in Royals history, but we have to call it a night," end quote. And then something about an early surgery in school the next day. To his credit, he acknowledged his poor judgment in leaving, but I've often wondered how he feels thinking back, having missed the conclusion of that game. Surely it haunts him to this day. As I finished typing anecdote 1, I realize this is probably a terrible place for this, so in a final edited version, this may appear much closer to the front of this story, but for now it leads into anecdotes 2 and 3. At some point during the night, the wonderful third base side Diamond Club table's usher, hostess, Betsy, had noticed the 2 empty chairs at our table, and at a perfectly timed moment, as I recall, sometime around the 10th or 11th inning, asked if an older gentleman could take a seat next to us. We, of course, said no problem. I'd like to think I recognized him before seeing his name on his very official-looking credential. My only regret from this night was not talking more to this gentleman, who seemed friendly enough in the few interactions we did have. I hope to edit this rambling of an article someday when his name magically and randomly at the strangest moment pops into my head, because for whatever reason the detail of his name eludes me. Perhaps it's my older age, or the fact that sensory overload from that night and the many to follow only allow for so many details in the human brain. But we were sitting for a few innings next to one of the most famous umpires in baseball history. I can assure you that any fan of baseball, even close to my age, do the math from my early mentions in this story if you really want to know, or just reread the part where I tell you my age, would absolutely recognize his name. It's not Joe West, and I certainly would have remembered Don Dinkinger. What was it? Still not coming. Anyway, the very famous umpire left after just a few innings. And anecdote 3 begins with Betsy again asking if someone could sit with us. This time, press credentials. A Kansas City Star writer, in fact. Turns out he wrote a pretty good story equating what I've been calling energy, noise, and excitement in actual measurements, decibels. I'm quoted at the conclusion of that article. You can read that at the link in the description. Spoiler alert, it does mention how the game ends. Speaking of the game ending, it was never going to. We've moved on to the 12th inning now, and although this seems like an utterly ridiculous place to try and not make this story too long, let's just try and say that the A's scored a run. A rather uneventful walk, sack, bunt, wild pitch, single kind of run. Nothing fancy, very Royals-like in fact. A bit ugly, but worth one nonetheless. Now with the strikeout and a pop foul, ending the inning, it was one more than the Royals had again. Of course it was. Of course, this is how it ends. An amazing comeback that seemed to have come up 90 feet short, only to get that last 90 feet an inning later to get more chances. But now in the 12th, nearly 4 hours after the game had started, not quite midnight by the way, correcting an earlier guess of the time, the stupid A's scored a run. The once proud expansive franchise ending our 29-year drought of no October baseball was going to lose a one-game playoff wildcard in the dying minutes of September. We weren't even actually going to play in October. We were going to lose a postseason game in September in 12 innings. Of course we were. The lovable losers had long since beaten down the 70s American League just good enough to lose to the Yankees every year's powerhouse franchise. The roller coaster ride always ends, but was it going to end like this? This seems as painful as something like losing a World Series by having a guy thrown out at home plate trying for an inside-the-park home run. Too soon? All right. A leadoff ground out start the 12th inning for the Royals certainly pointed to a cruel ending. Then Eric Hosmer changed, once again, the course of Royals history. He launched a high fly ball to deep left field. Very deep, way back. Could it be? Could it tie the game? No. But it did bounce off the top of the wall, and Hosmer ended up at third with the triple, 90 feet away. I feel like we've heard that before, and I feel like we'll hear it again, just not in this article. But there he was, the tying run. Let's play all night. Why not? It's been 29 years. What's a few more hours, a few more innings? Christian Clone at the plate. You'll recall not that many words ago, I used the phrase Royals-like run. Those that lived with this team in 2013, 14, and 15 know exactly what I mean. Just put the bat on the ball and run like hell. Maybe something good will happen. Those kinds of hits. Ground balls with eyes look down on those types of hits. They're often ugly, but they count just the same. Christian Clone, a disappointing 4th overall draft pick in 2010, was in his rookie major league season, pounds a pitch straight down. It launches into the air a mile high. Eric Hosmer assumes the role of run like hell and scampered, a word we don't use enough these days, home to tie the game. Once more, I feel like this narrative comes up again in the future. And once again, the crowd goes wild. So here we are again. Was just being here enough? And we all again convinced ourselves of that? I know I went through most, if not all, of the 5 stages of grief, including acceptance a few times tonight. But here we were again. It wasn't over yet. Foul pop-up by Alex Gordon for the second out of the inning, and the calls to babysitters had started again. It wasn't over yet. Still, again, Salvador Perez came to the plate for the 6th time that night. He had struck out twice already. Christian Clone, remember him? He's still on first base. He had stolen 2 bases in the 21 games he appeared in as part of the 2014 regular season. He would have 3 stolen bases in his next 129 games of his career. Christian Clone stole second base. Josh Donaldson hit 164 home runs between 2013 and 2017. That's a lot. In 2014, Josh Donaldson played 1,320 and 2/3 innings at third base. He made 23 years for a .952 fielding percentage. There are a lot of numbers that try to define defensive players. His in 2014 were average-ish for the most part, but he was a good third baseman. Salvador Perez was not known for taking pitches. He had seen just 18 pitches and 5 at-bats so far tonight. He felt off a few pitches and worked the count to 2-2. Salvi liked to swing the bat. And then though there's probably a stat on it somewhere, I don't have it handy, but any Royals fan of this era knows Salvador Perez thought his bat was 44 inches long and swung at more pitches outside than any player in baseball history. Please note the previous statement is unofficial. But knowing this, seeing how his pitcher was pitching Salvador Perez, and knowing that the shortstop now in the game didn't have the greatest range, Josh Donaldson took a few steps to his left. a few steps towards second base. A few steps, just 2 steps in fact, toward the hole between him and the shortstop to cut off a ground ball in the hole. There was no way any hitter, much less one 0-5 on the night, was going to pull the steady diet of low and outside pitches he was getting. No way. It simply wasn't possible. So Josh Donaldson took a few steps to his left. Then, in what can only be described as a lunging motion, Josh Donaldson was about a split second away from being wrong. So very wrong to have taken just a step or two to his left. Salvador Perez not only somehow reached the 6th pitch of the at-bat that was low and well outside. Salvador Perez not only somehow hit this ball fair. Salvador Perez not only somehow hit this ball hard. Salvador Perez actually pulled this pitch down the third baseline. Josh Donaldson dove. The ball hit off the tip of Josh Donaldson's glove and continued into left field. And after 29 years and 5 hours, just like that, the Royals rewrote their story. The stuff of bobbleheads was made. Salvi with 2 arms in the air. To this day, I guess I just assumed he made it to first base to make it official. Colon rounding third to score. I feel like he was going to have another big moment at some point. And the Royals win it 9-8 in 12 innings. 29 years of waiting was worth it. Now, it really didn't matter. It wasn't going to get better than this game, this night, this ending, this moment. Many will argue that it did get better. Perhaps it was a year and a month later, maybe only the next series. But for me, this was the best night. My kids were born during the day, and I was married during the day. This was the best night of my life. I was at every postseason game in Kansas City in 2014 and 2015, even 2 World Series games in San Francisco. But I was not in New York on November 1st, 2015. I was back on the couch in front of the TV and was once again overcome with emotion when it ended. But it wasn't the same as that night. That night reminded me why I love sports, why I love the Royals, why I love Kansas City. I've pointed out, unnecessarily to be sure, that I am not a professional writer. But I did intentionally break up the drama of this account of a night many of us have lived, many of us have loved, many of us will never forget, because this wasn't about what happened on the field. It was about how it felt to be a fan of this team, how it feels 5 years later, how it will always feel. It had its ups and downs, often not separated by much. It had anxiety, hope, joy, pure elation, heartbreak, sadness, anger, frustration. Again, not separated by more than a few deep breaths at times. The cliche ending here is a metaphor for life. I suppose it works out almost perfectly. Not just this one game, not just this one night, but any game or any season in any sport. Most not this extreme, of course, and never life and death, as sometimes, or better said, all too often real life brings us. But I do believe what we can learn from sports is that you never know what's next. You think you know. You can even be really sure you know, but you don't know. The truth is, when I started writing this in my head, laying in bed, not being able to sleep, and even as I started to type it out, I had no idea how it would end or how it should end. Did I mention I'm not a real writer? And frankly, I think I'm ending it kind of crappy at 5 in the morning, sitting in the dark on the couch. Yes, the same couch that started the story. To paraphrase a line from Daniel Tosh's stand-up, I'm aware I could end the article at the good part. I choose not to. Maybe it doesn't end. Don't worry, it does. Because sports never ends. It's another great thing about sports. It starts and stops, yes, but it doesn't end. Kansas City had hope for 29 years that this night would come. I suspect nobody dared to dream of it going exactly like this, but we believed it would come. This night was just the beginning. An amazing ride did come to a painful end a magical month later, but we got back on the ride the next season, and it ended better. Now we are back to hoping, dreaming, believing it can happen again. It feels like another life metaphor should eloquently be rolled in here, but it won't be happening. Instead, the article will end abruptly, just like it should have when Salvador Perez hit an impossible to hit pitch to an impossible to hit spot on the field. That just a few pitches later, a few pitches before, would have resulted in an easy out, and the end of that night would not yet have been written.